My name is Asma N. And whenever someone asks me how did I come to do this work, the what I always share is that I didn't just wake up one day and say this is what I wanted to do. I backed into it because it wasn't my goal or my objective. I come from a very impoverished background. My mother was the first person in the family to even graduate from high school. And I was the first one in my family to even go to college. So what my mother wanted to do was that she went up north and she sent money back to my grandmother to take care of us because she was able to get a better life because she was the only one who did not want to have those types of jobs. She wanted better for herself and better for her children, which was myself and my brother. Because uh, my mother was sending money back, I did go to Catholic school, which was like it was considered private school because she wanted me to have a quality education, whereas the education in the South was not that good. I mean, because they weren't really being trained to do anything other than work in the fields. And living with my grandmother, I I relate that she worked as what I called a maid slave because she worked for this physician and she would leave out early in the morning to go and prepare for take care of his family, his wife and his children, and she stayed there all day until they went to sleep. In the last years of her life, she had what she felt something in her stomach. It was about the size of a pea, like a green pea, which means it wasn't that big. And the person she worked for was a physician. He said to her, "Don't worry about it. It will never amount to anything." 5 years later, that pea had grown into the cancer that resulted in her dying. And why this was, again, a sad thing is because my grandmother, she didn't matter to these individuals because, of course, when she died, they just got someone else to do the same job. And she was someone who had, you know, no status in the sense of being someone important. She had no money. She had no health insurance because, of course, if you worked in those situations, you didn't have any health insurance. And so she just didn't matter to anyone. But I loved her. I love my grandmother so much. And as a result of seeing how she was treated, I decided that I wanted to be able to um, finish school, will grow up, finish school, and go to college to be able to help people like my grandmother. And something my mother told me, she said, go to school to be a nurse. Said, because when people are hurting, they don't care what color you are. So from that conversation till till I actually ended up going to college, I decided I never knew I wanted to do anything different, which was to be able to go to school to be a nurse. I ended up getting accepted to Howard University, and that was where I ended up going to college for nursing. And when I was at Howard, people would come in and they would ask, especially for Muslim women, when they would come into the hospital, they were people from other countries. They didn't have any status and they didn't have health insurance. So something that they wanted when they would come in labor, which is usually the main reason why they would come to the hospital, is that they wanted certain things, out of respect for, our faith tradition. And the doctor would say yes. What I realized is that a doctor cannot write an order or make a promise to you, which is against hospital policy. And all of the things that they were asking of their physician was against the hospital's policy. What I learned is that you cannot, the only way that you can provide help to anyone is that you have to actually own the practice itself. I then, from taking that information from Howard and the individuals that came there and my grandmother, I established Muslimat Al Nisa because I wanted to be able to care for those individuals who was just like my grandmother, people who didn't matter, that no one cared about, and to give them quality care in a professional and dignified setting. I would get a lot of women from other countries who would come. And on this particular occasion, a woman came to me, and her husband came with her. And so I take her back to the exam room. The husband is with her. And I'm thinking to myself, why on earth would a man want to come and be back here when a woman's having a female health exam? And when he sees me, getting ready to actually, examine her, her vaginally, he says, I think I'll just go wait back out front. With this woman, for the first time in her adult life, she was alone with someone she could trust. And that was me. She now shares with me that she is a victim of domestic violence. Hearing about someone being, beaten in the manner in which she was talked, was of course, well, just beaten in general, was devastating to my heart. And I was trying to think of what could I do. I made up diseases. I made up diseases that would cause him to have to bring her back. So I kept thinking of reasons as to why I could bring her back. And just to finally, what I realized, I was just putting a Band-Aid on the situation. I wasn't stopping anything in terms of the abuse. And so what I realized at that moment is I need to establish a shelter for Muslim women victims of domestic violence. So I started getting many women from these countries who were victims of domestic violence. And that's why I established the shelter, because my heart couldn't take just sending them right back into the hands of the abuser. The reason why I established a shelter for Muslim women is twofold. First of all, before I actually did the shelter myself, and I was trying to be able to find a place to send, the Muslim women, to send them, getting them the information. What I discovered, again, through talking with the women, is when they would go to, as Muslims, and being in a Christian country, when they would go to, which is not a bad thing, it's just stating a fact, when they would go to these other shelters, based on the negative or misunderstandings or misinformation that they may these shelters may have about Muslims, one of the things that they would tell them is that you're part of that religion that says it's okay to beat women. So therefore, if you want our help, then you have to come up out of that religion and accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. That's what they would tell them, because most of the shelters were ran by, whether it was, Catholic charities or, Christian organizations. And they would also force the women to, because it was a part of their program, that they would have to go to church or Bible study and these types of things. So it's like they had to give up their faith, for a roof over their head. I ended up going to school to be a chaplain. I went to Hartford Seminary because I wanted to be able to provide counseling, to those who were coming to me for help. I mean, being a nurse is one thing, but then there's also, they needed more than just, healthcare. They also needed, spiritual and, and emotional, psychological care. And being a chaplain, helped to facilitate that. Discriminatory practices is not based on necessarily your program, but it's as if you're offering the same thing. When you're offering the same thing for everybody. So when a Muslim woman goes into a shelter, you're asking for special privileges. So if someone does not offer that, they're not being discriminatory. They're just saying, this is our program, because there are certain tenets of your faith that you cannot ask others to be able to do. So that's the reason why the only way to be able to, to help them and to accommodate the faith traditions was to be able to establish a shelter for Muslim women. When a person is a victim of domestic violence, the main way they're able to survive through it all is their handhold to God. So why, if they make it through, would you want to break that handhold? And that's the reason why it was very important to me, not just for the Muslims, but for any faith tradition. You want to be able to, to let them keep that, because that was how they were able to survive. So it's not being, like I said, against anyone else. It's just that if this is the only shelter that Muslim women could come to and be able to still practice their faith tradition, then I provide that, because there's so many shelters, for others, and this is the only one. And what I did was I ended up being a part of the communities of shelters, where I said, okay, this is what we should do. If you have a Muslim that comes to your shelter, or that is a request, send her to me. That will save a bed for someone else that would come, for where that they were able to accommodate her. So it's kind of in my thought process, that it levels it out, so that no one is being turned away and no one is being mistreated, as a victim.